Hello, everyone. This is Anthony Otero, community lead here at HR University, and this is another a series of our HR story series. And we're meeting today with Shannon Zengler. She is the director of HR at Valeo Financial Advisors Group. Shannon, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, yes. So Shannon, um, was very interested in getting you on, our webinar to talk about your experience. I see you have insurance, you have finance, in terms of your background. But can you just walk us through your career journey, kind of how you started and kind of where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So I graduated college in 2007. So right in the middle of the peak of the Great Recession. So it was kind of a weird time in the job market. So I bounced around in some very odd roles. Marketing. I was in early childhood education for a period of time. And while in education, I actually was an assistant director of a preschool, which was really engaging and interesting in terms of how children process information, but also terrifying when you're one person against an army of like 12 2-year-olds. So, so pretty soon I identified that I wanted to be surrounded by adults and transitioned, which is a Fortune 500 in the insurance area. You can't turn on the TV without seeing the gecko somewhere. Yeah. I started in the call center and naturally gravitated towards kind of the training and development side. I was always really the person in like my friend group and peer groups and elsewhere that people came to for advice or suggestions. I always kind of was a natural mentor.
Okay.
So training and employee development became a natural segue for me. And from there, worked my way towards more of the corporate overall human resources. Part of my last kind of project was being on a task force that was assigned to open Geico Indianapolis, which is where I live now, and build that location and hire, up to 1,000 associates within the first 2 years. So a really engaging, challenging experience. And then I was also responsible for kind of the new hire experience on the service side around the country. From there, kind of became enchanted with the idea of going to more of a smaller to mid-size organization because Geico had been in business for 75 plus years. So it was about kind of maintaining us in certain signature expectations. Maybe not as much openness to innovation and organizational change, which is natural given where they were. So I wanted to explore an organization at a different phase of that kind of life cycle. Yeah. So I transitioned in 2018 to my current role, which is Valeo Financial Advisors. And Valeo was really at that critical pivotal point of transitioning from being a small kind of close-knit organization to becoming a quote unquote real company and growing. And so I came in and since in the past 5 years have really built all of the HR and people programs for the organization, which has been a really fun challenge.
Very nice. I want to kind of dive into that a little bit because we've spoken with different professionals in HR throughout this year. Kind of for our students, I'm a new grad. What's the pros of starting for a larger company and then going smaller first versus starting in a small company startup culture then going to large? I think there's pros and cons to both, and obviously, and we'll get to Valeo. But I'm just curious, since you have a T&D perspective, what are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the biggest differences between them will obviously be the scale and the amount of resources around you. So when you start in like a larger Fortune 500 organization, there will likely be lots of different specialized roles within human resources and also lots of infrastructure in terms of managers, supervisors, and peers. So you might have a team that's just recruiting or you might just be in training or you might just be in compensation and benefits. So it's a good area to get exposure in a specific part of human resources and maybe leapfrog from one specialty to another. But it may not be the right fit if you think that you want to try a more general experience and dip your toes in a lot of things at the same time. That type of experience, a startup or a small company is great for, because human resources by nature wears a lot of hats. And you will typically, in a smaller organization, you might be an individual contributor. You might be the only face of HR in an organization as a generalist, or you might be on a small team. And so then you might spend all day, doing interviews, talking passionate about.
Okay. And thank you for kind of providing that perspective. I think that's definitely important. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to approach it. I think there's just pros and cons, to that, and whatnot. Talk a little bit about your current role, kind of your line of sight, your scope. Do you just have training and development, or are there other areas of HR that are in your portfolio?
Yeah. So I've kind of had to learn all of the areas just by doing. I would say I probably have had the most experience in employee relations and training and development, leadership and recruiting. But certainly along the way, have learned a lot about benefits. Valeo transitioned to self-funded for insurance, for example, 2 years ago. So I'm getting to learn all about
Oh,
the
wow.
world of
Okay.
health insurance. And ACA compliance and all of those things that weren't in my wheelhouse before. So it's kind of always experimenting in some new area of the channel.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about any strategies or technologies, either at your current role or previously, that you saw an opportunity to streamline? And if so, what, from a training perspective, or what that might have looked like?
I'm so sorry, Anthony. There's a little bit of a lag, and I'm not sure if it's on your side or my side, but could you repeat that question for me?
Yeah, sure, sure. So, so I was asking in terms of strategies and strategies that you've implemented having to do with streamlining. Anything that you
Mm.
process you may have streamlined. If so, what project or initiative that might have been?
Yeah. So I'm an efficiency girl. If something can take me 5 clicks instead of 10, I'm going to be all over it. And so that has always been kind of the cornerstone of what I do when I come into a team and I evaluate, for example, especially in terms of software. So when I joined Valeo, for example, we had a set software that we used for payroll. We had a separate software that we used solely for open enrollment and benefits, and a separate LMS that was a completely different website. So to do some really basic HR functions, you had to teach employees 3 different systems and have them remember it, even though they won't go there every single day. So one of the first things I did was, there has to be an all-in-one solution. And yes, it may not be as sophisticated as a specialized software, but teaching
Right.
someone to go one stop and do all of those things is going to be far more effective and more of a time saver and increase adoption, as opposed to using all of these other tools, as valuable as they were. So that was one of the first things, was just, how can I streamline? How can I centralize to increase adoption of core processes?
Got it. Got it. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what contributes to a positive employee experience?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So number one for a positive employee experience is accountability. And I don't mean accountability from the top down to the entry level. I mean the other way. I mean, like, when an employee comes to HR or their leader with a concern, they have to feel like they were heard, and that information was received. Now, it's not to say that we can always please everyone and we can't always modify procedure or make grand exceptions, but just telling someone, I hear you and I understand where you're coming from, goes miles in terms of implementing a positive culture. You do also then, when you make a promise to change something, you actually have to do it, and you have to walk the walk as well as talk the talk.
Uh, Couldn't agree more. Uh, couldn't agree more. Can you talk a little bit about kind of DI initiatives? Because also part of employee experience as well that you may have been a part of or in your career.
Yeah, DEI and B, is really gone through a reckoning, I think, across all organizations and especially within human resources circles about how do you do this and how do you do this intentionally. I've fortunately witnessed a lot of organizations that had the best of intentions and they went about it the wrong way. They went for maybe just a check the box approach. I just need to make sure I change my ratios in some way. And so let me just go hire a bunch of people. How is the culture once that individual arrives? You also
Sure,
have to be really intentional with diversity and inclusion and that belonging about what does diversity mean for your organization? Because there's a wide range. It could be age, it could be gender, it could be, religious
sure.
background, socioeconomic status. So if you don't understand what the benefit is or what you're trying to do, then you could end up creating more of a disengaging culture than positive. Um, for example, we have on our Valeo and operations team that not intentionally, but just because of the support work and the fact that it was more back office, I think the administrative nature of that role appealed primarily to female candidates. So that
Okay,
team was primarily women at the time. And over the last few years, we have actually, hired a few great gentlemen who have joined the team, and that has changed the dynamic, but you wouldn't on the face of it consider that diversity, but because of the makeup of that team, it was a really
sure.
positive change. So that's where, like, it's important that we don't pigeonhole when we think about inclusion and belonging, and we're open to a variety. In terms of how you attack that or that strategy is, again, thinking about evaluating all aspects of your recruiting and hiring practices. Where are you advertising?
Mm.
What conversations are you having? Looking at your benefit strategies. Does your time off policies and hybrid policies and other things, do those make sense for the workforce that you're trying to attract?
Can you expand upon the total rewards benefit piece of DI? I think I think that's an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So to develop a family leave policy for Valeo, one of the things I'm most proud of is
Yeah.
that family leave policy was written by the women of our firm. We gathered,
Okay.
all of the female advisors together, and we talked out, what were the challenges, what are the things that they think they need, how would they feel to best be supported. And we were able to create a very flexible policy that includes robust paid leave for, the immediate term in event of maternity or paternity, but also a flexible work arrangement for the rest of that year. So that way they can be really intentional about how to transition back to the workforce with the new change in their family dynamic.
That's awesome. That's definitely awesome. Um, can you talk to us in the spirit of employee engagement? Can you talk about how does your organization measure employee engagement?
Yeah, so we evaluate employee engagement by the general connectivity and engagement that we see, such as participation in company events, engagement on surveys, and other activities. We really drive kind of an overall culture of connection and mentorship. It's inherent in a lot of aspects of our model, for how our business grows and scales. So it's kind of inherent that you have to be engaged, or else we wouldn't hit any of our other KPIs.
Excellent, excellent. How do you go about nurturing or kind of from a workforce planning, a bench perspective, identifying high potential employees and kind of what's the strategy around that?
Yeah, so that's probably an area that's always going to be challenging because an organization's needs always change. So what could be your ideal candidate profile 18 months ago because of the way a team has evolved or the growth of the organization, that may change. So the biggest piece to be able to continue your recruiting pipeline is to be open to that change and not so rigid to the idea that I have to have a student athlete or whatever that criteria was. Think about broadening it, evaluating it, always being willing to challenge your own biases as a recruiter. So that way you push yourself and your organization forward.
Excellent, excellent. Talk a little. I know you're, right now you have a scope, as director, multiple CO, center of excellence or areas are in your wheelhouse. But you mentioned earlier in this conversation that you were training and development. That's where you started, right? Kind of in this space, how do you look at kind of what either methods or technologies to invest in, or right? Because training and development's it's ever changing how folks are upskilling.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about kind of your philosophy, your own personal philosophy, and then for yourself, and then kind of upskilling, the workforce and partnering with the business.
Yeah. So I think in terms of my personal development, it's about building awareness. So when I consume media, whether it's on social media for personal reasons or for professional, making sure like I've trained myself to just keep in mind, like, oh, that was really interesting, or I wonder how they did that. And, leveraging YouTube or other places. So that way I have some basic expertise. Like I'm never going to be the best graphic designer in the world, but I can figure it out. And so teaching yourself to be resourceful is really critical for any aspect of HR in terms of that natural upskilling. The benefit of HR is because I think the broader business world has finally kind of keyed into how critical people operations and human resources is as in terms of being a strategic business partner, that there is a ton of resources to upskill no matter what your specialty or generalization. There are obviously certificates, there are tons of books. I'm sure there are plenty of podcast series if you're an auditory learner. There are free resources now like Canva that can help you with some basic instructional design, YouTube tutorials. So really even TikTok with HR practitioners sharing kind of the do's and don'ts from there. So no matter how you consume media, there is a way that you can adjust that scale or turn the dial up just a little bit more for yourself, as long as you continue to self-reflect on like, where do I feel like I'm weakest and could use some retooling.
Where where have you found in terms of kind of executives or kind of line leaders, uh, kind of the bang for their buck in terms of like their employees upskill? Do you see it more in kind of self-learning? Do you see it more in the traditional environment? Do you see it more certificates, conferences? And totally depends on the industry
Yeah.
and the job. Because I'm just curious, with someone with TD background, because there's so many different offerings now. It can be overwhelming. Like, hey, like, where do I begin? They're just curious, kind of like
Yeah.
how you and when you partner with your leaders, how do you navigate through
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's not only dependent on the industry, it's also dependent on like what the goal is. Because like if you're
that?
trying to address someone's soft skills, like maybe someone isn't a great communicator or going to a conference.
Do they hear?
Then I think any of like online free certification programs or certificates are
Can you hear me, Shannon? Sorry,
I
can you
can
hear
hear
me?
you. Yeah, and I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Okay, great. No, I wasn't sure. So I think you were saying, 'cause I may have missed the part. So you're saying in terms of conferences, that could be a good way to upskill?
For a soft skill or a social development, if you're learning how to network or things of that nature, if you're trying to upskill something technical, then probably something online or practicum based is going to
Okay.
make more sense, because you want to be able to practice that and immediately get feedback on whether you've mastered that specific task or function.
Got it. Okay. Okay, very good. Just want to ask you a couple of final questions here. And it doesn't have to be, from a TD perspective, but can you just share with us um, impactful HR initiatives that you are proud of in your career and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned the family leave policy earlier. I'm very proud of that.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
another
Yes.
Another initiative that I'm really proud of is I really believe that part of our role as leaders is to empower the next generation, and I've had the pleasure and privilege of being able to develop and expand internship programs at pretty much every organization I've ever been at.
Nice.
And
Nice.
and so, and for ex- and then this summer, actually, we will have our largest cohort. We will have 20 summer interns from a variety of universities and backgrounds, which will be fabulous. And I'm so excited to see what they learn and how they take what they learn into their coursework and future careers. But we've also advanced that into the high school. We sponsor a corporate work study program with a local institution here in Indianapolis, which is designed to give students exposure to the professional world, and hopefully encourage them to attend college and complete a 4-year degree, which is really great.
Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, And so, with that, just my last question for you is, what do you think are essential skills for HR professionals to thrive?
Yeah. So I think for HR professionals to thrive, I mentioned earlier, but you need to be resourceful. You need to be comfortable not having all of the information, but knowing how to find it. So whether that's Google or other resources, like being able to kind of solve your own problem, will be fundamental to human resources. The other part is, it seems kind of obvious, but I still sometimes feel like I need to stress this. You need to also like and care about people and have a strong bit of empathy to be successful in human resources, because fundamentally the goal of human resources is to be that liaison and advocate between the employees and upper leadership. And so you
Yes.
can't navigate that landscape if you don't fundamentally feel driven to care about the people that are under your stewardship.
That makes sense. Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. And and you definitely had, cited the idea of, being resourceful and, when we talked about kind of contributing to positive employee experiences, leaders wanting to listen and having an open ear. So that is consistent even as the HR professional, kind of your thoughts. So I think that's really cool, and I think it's awesome, in terms of what you're doing with the high school students. Just curious, what is it? Are they kind of shadowing? What type of work are they kind of engaging in?
Yeah, so it's a great program, and it's not something Valeo created. The school had it in place, but we're really excited to be one of their corporate partners. But essentially, we sponsor the student's tuition, and that student works 1 day a week in the environment. So, and we put them to work. They might be at the front desk working on projects. They might be shadowing other individuals, but they get
Hmm.
a full kind of 8-hour day with professional experience that hopefully, again, will inspire them to want to join a more professional career path once they graduate high school.
That's amazing. At the high school level, right? It's never too early to learn how to be a professional. So that's
Mhm.
great. Well, Shannon, it was a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm sure the community is, definitely enjoy your HR perspective and journey. Definitely, it was great having you, and you have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anthony. It was such a pleasure.